All right, let's talk about the Pittsburgh Steelers, who find themselves in such a unique situation, except for the fact that it's seemingly the situation they find themselves in every year, but it's very unusual to what most teams are in, which is they're a playoff team that, at times looked like a really good playoff team. I remember the Steelers and the Eagles played each other late in the season, relatively later on in the season, and those were kind of considered like, I think the Eagles were considered a little better, but they weren't considered like different tier of teams. Definitely one went in a very positive direction, one went in a very negative direction. How did the Steelers become the Eagles? How did the Steelers find a way to not just be a playoff team, but to have ultimately rebuild and become a championship quality team once again? Well, let's get into it. First, we have to talk about the situation they find themselves in now. So this is the cap situation of you have $53 million in cap space for 2025. It then balloons up to $158 million in 2026. So they have some money that they can work with. Not a ton, but they have some. The thing is, part of why they have money is because they're not currently paying a quarterback in 2025. You look at their upcoming free agents list, and the number next to them is how many millions they're projected to get in free agency, and just quite frankly, they have some decisions to make. Russell Wilson and Justin Fields, PFF saying Russell Wilson could get $35 million a year. That feels like a lot. I mean, if it was 2/3 of the way through the year, I'd kind of say, yeah, I get it. But given how the season ended for the Steelers, I mean, I don't know. Wilson still played well. Like, he was one of the better quarterbacks we've seen with the Steelers for most of the season, for most of the past 5 years or so since Big Ben has left. But still, can you really be competitive if you're paying Russell Wilson that kind of money when even now you're struggling to actually do something once you get to the playoffs? Do you consider Justin Fields at $11 million and hope that you can kind of use the money to spread out the roster? Najee Harris is an interesting guy who you have to wonder how much the Saquon Barkley situation is going to help someone like Najee Harris. In fact, I think Barkley made Najee Harris millions of dollars this year because some team, whether it's the Steelers or someone else, is going to say, well, look at that situation. Running backs matter. I don't want to, not get a guy like Najee Harris who, for all his faults, has been a consistent, solid player for them. Dan Moore Jr. is a good offensive lineman for the Pittsburgh Steelers. You'd like to keep him. And then some other guys who you could, take or leave if you want to. Mike Williams, Preston Smith. I'm re-signing James Daniels if it's only $6 million. And then Dante Jackson, do you keep him as well? Cornerback for them. These are the key things. And obviously the biggest decision is going to just be the quarterback. Do you go with one of those two guys? Do you draft somebody again? Do you trade for somebody? What do you do? If you look at their PFF grades for each positional category, they were the 15th ranked passing unit last year. With what they were paying for the quarterback position was really a steal. I mean, usually you have to pay good money. Usually they're paying like 30, 40 million to get the 15th graded passing unit. They were much better than that, nickeling and diming it. But of course, now both those guys are free agents, so what do? Receiving was solid. I still think they could use another guy in the building. Pickens is really good, but I think they could use a more consistent like number 2 option. Personally, I do like Freiermuth at the tight end position though. PFF says they had one of those weird offensive lines that was pretty good at run blocking, but not as great at pass blocking. Running was middle of the road, according to PFF, so maybe you don't need to pay big money for Najee Harris for that. Potentially, you could draft a guy in round 5 who could maybe do something similar. I don't know. It's possible. Run defense 11th, pass rush first, because you got TJ Watt. I mean, of course, it's first. TJ Watt, Alex Highsmith, Cam Hayward. It's pretty much always going to be first for the Pittsburgh Steelers. 23rd in coverage, so they're not horrible anywhere. Only 2 spots where they're bottom 10, and even those spots are barely bottom 10. But still, there's really only one area you would look at and say this team is great, and that is their defensive line. And I think that's kind of been the issue with Pittsburgh for a while. Great defensive line, and you have Mike Tomlin, who I think is a great head coach, but that's kind of all you really have. And because of that, with those two things being so good, you're able to be a consistent playoff team, but there's not enough areas where they're able to really dominate in a way where they're able to be a championship contender. So what do you do from this? Well, there's really 2 things you could do. One is the simple, obvious, boring answer of let's just try and make some small moves in free agency. Don't go crazy there, but make the right moves. And then let's make sure we draft well, get good talent that way. Sure, we're picking later in rounds, and they actually only have 6 picks right now. They are missing their 6th round pick. But other than that, they're okay. And draft picks, let's just draft some quality players, make sure we can get guys in the building who can play, and then go from there. There's also the let's go crazy scenario here, which they could consider to do if they want to. This is where basically you could, I'm saying kind of the two amazing parts of this team are TJ Watt and Mike Tomlin. Just going to throw this out there. Steelers fans, don't hate me. Let's just play it out. Do you consider a blockbuster move? TJ Watt won't go. I just don't think that can happen. I don't think the ownership will like it. The fans will revolt, even if it were to strategically make sense, similar to how like Matthew Stafford was so good with the Lions that they couldn't get a good draft pick, so they traded him for 2 first-round picks, and then also were bad, so they were able to get a top 2 pick, which they spent on Hutchinson, and were able to kind of rebuild that way. That's the logic. I just don't think it could happen. I think the fans would revolt, and so, okay, fine, fair enough. But Tomlin's another interesting piece. Do you consider trading him? It's hard to do it now because there's no, everyone has a coach, so you can't do it this season. But next season, do you consider trading him if you want to? Well, again, you can't do it now. He's there. There's no team that needs a head coach. So realistically, no, you probably can't do either of those big moves. But it is something to at least I would think about if I was a Steelers GM. That's just how I view it. So if you can't do those big moves, then what do you have to do? Well, you have to just keep trying to be consistently smart here. Where do you want to go about it? And the quarterback position is the most important position. I do think it wouldn't be the worst idea in the world to draft a guy in like rounds 3. I also don't think it'd be the worst idea to take some flyers on some of these quarterback options. There is the Sam Darnold discussion. Do you pay him? Again, I've seen people projected he might get $40 million a year or so. Is he someone you pay attention to? Do you try and get him who can be, again, I think a good quarterback, although I guess how much better is he than Russell Wilson, and is it worth all that money? Probably not. So then do you nickel and dime it? Justin Fields could be pretty good, might not take a ton of money because he was benched, so that's something you think about. Do you go with Andy Dalton and say, like, let's just be okay here, or a Joe Flacco or a Jameis Winston? I don't know. Jameis Winston would be wild. Do you go with something like that? Do you try and find a player who maybe you could take a flyer on? Zach Wilson, who we've seen former Jets have success left and right. Do you go after a guy like that? Probably not. Like, none of these options are great, and again, they don't pick high enough in the draft to get a guy unless you like someone that could fall to you, like they did with Kenny Pickett. Ultimately, that didn't work out, but that's the logic. At the end of the day, they got to figure something out. What would I do? I think I would keep Justin Fields. He looked pretty good. You probably wouldn't have to pay him a ton of money compared to Russell Wilson. I think I'd keep Justin Fields, and then I also try for some plan B. And whether that plan B is signing Zach Wilson and seeing if he can wow you in training camp, which he probably will because he's really good in training camp, and great player when he's wearing shorts, right? I think what I would actually do is spend a draft pick in the mid-round, find someone that you like that way, or maybe if there's someone you really fall in love with that will fall to you when you're drafting, in the first round, not the worst idea. But to me, I think I go with Fields, let Wilson walk. But that's kind of how I see it. What do you think? Let me know in the comments below. Always love hearing from you. And of course, as always, thanks for watching.